Today I'll be going over part 10 of Larry Geller's book, Unchained Melody. This is the final video in the series, and we are in the month of July 1977 now. Larry says a couple of weeks into the month, he called Graceland to tell Elvis he wouldn't be coming to Memphis yet, but Elvis barely listened. He was too consumed with worry about the bodyguard's book. Elvis said, "My so-called friends turned Judas on me. As far as I'm concerned, in the long run, it won't matter. I've already let that effing no-good book take its toll on me. You know how the mind has so many preconceived ideas? I've been through the whole gamut. Larry, I tell you, I pity those guys. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. They have to live for the rest of their lives with what they're doing. So my attitude is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Only what's eaten away at me is, what is Lisa Marie going to think of her daddy when she grows up?" Larry had the same response as before. He said, "Elvis, you said it again. What do you mean, what will Lisa think when she grows up? What does she have to think? You'll tell her. You'll explain to her if they exaggerate or blow things out of proportion. Or if they out and out lie, you'll explain that to her also. She'll understand. She'll believe you." Elvis didn't say anything, but Larry could hear how upset he was. Elvis sounded overwhelmed and like he was trying not to cry. Elvis said, "And what if I'm not here to tell her, Larry?" Then the line suddenly went dead, and it left Larry feeling shaken. About 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. Elvis sounded foggy. "Hey, Larry, did I hang up on you or what? Man, my damn brain went dead on me or something." Larry told him, "Elvis, I heard a click, then a dial tone. I wasn't sure if you hung up or we were disconnected." Elvis said, "Larry, it's my fault, man. This thing has got me way off center. Man, I feel like I'm going to explode. Yeah, it's the book and other things. Good God, why does everything happen at once? Well, like it says in the Desiderata, do not stress yourself with dark imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. With all these terrible things going on, that effing book coming out, I don't want to lose Ginger. In the meantime, I'll just hang in there. You know, I'm not the only one. Everyone has their own cross to bear. But when you start bleeding, it's a mess. Larry, this time I'm going to just hang up. I need to. We'll talk about this later." Larry said, "Elvis, I just want you to know I love you." Elvis said, "Larry, I love you too. Talk to you later." On August 4th, Elvis called Larry directly instead of having Charlie or one of the guys call for him, which was very unusual. Elvis said, "Larry, you're still in LA. What's going on? I know Hookstratton already checked the situation out." Larry told him, "I just got the papers. I was going to call you as soon as I wrap everything up here. Then I'll fly back. It'll probably be in a week or so." Elvis said, "You know, we have to leave on the 16th and I really need you here." Larry said, "Don't worry, E. I'll be there. By the way, when I went to Hookstratton's office to pick up the papers, you should have seen the look on his face as he handed them to me. He looked startled. He said, 'I'm sure you realize what Elvis is doing for you. No one has used his name like this. He certainly thinks a lot of you. He told me he'd be sending a copy to your father for you. Elvis, thank you so much." Elvis said, "You gotta be kidding. Giving you permission to use my name is the least I could do. So I'm happy to help you with your book. Oh, and I want to read you something from what Rudyard wrote about me. All right, listen to this. He says on page 10, 'A very important time for you, and also for the whole world, and you may play quite a significant role in what will happen then all over the globe.'" Larry says Elvis read the passage like he was proud of it, but Larry could hear the doubt in his voice. Elvis was trying to distract from what was really bothering him, and Larry knew him well enough to see through it. Elvis said, "Here, I'm skipping over this Rudyard astrology jargon that I don't know anything about. Here. My charts show a potential conflict between social forces and friends working upon me, and a deep quest for superpersonal values. Friends working upon me. That's putting it mildly." He says, "The tension indicated could conceivably affect your health or your most characteristic work at some periods, especially between 1972 and 1977. Well, Priscilla and I broke up in 1972. My so-called friends are trying to crucify me with their book in 77, and tensions have definitely taken their toll." Then it says here, "You seem eager and also able to leave permanent records of your personality and its ideals in a really enduring form." And you can see from what he says about the conflict between social forces and even friends that this is exactly what Cairo says in the Book of Numbers. Listen to this. Elvis grabbed that book and continued, "This is for number 8s like us. These people are invariably much misunderstood in their lives, and perhaps for this reason they feel intensely lonely at heart, and they generally play some important role on life's stage, but usually one which is fatalistic or as the instrument of fate for others. And such persons often are called on to face the very greatest sorrows, losses, and humiliations." Larry, I'm not saying we're bound by all this, but it sure explains my life. So I guess what I'm saying is, it's been written, and so shall it be done. And that reminds me, don't forget to get me the best book on the Holy Shroud of Jesus. Elvis had been talking for a half hour straight at this point. He said, "Man, good God, I've been yakking away. Only I had to." Larry told him, "Hey, E, don't worry about that." August 8th, 1977, Los Angeles. Larry wrote in his journal, "Today is my 38th birthday. Usually it's a happy, joyous occasion. However, this day I find myself overwhelmed as my mind keeps turning to Elvis. What is destroying him? And what about Ginger? Does she honestly love this man who is more than twice her age? I wonder if that's the reason Elvis has been telling me more and more about what happened when he was a child and as he was growing up, and more about Gladys and what she meant to him. And more he seems to be in tears as he remembers those things." Larry says he was so restless and shaken that night he had to leave the house around 10 p.m. He drove around aimlessly for a while, then headed to Mulholland Drive, hoping the view over the valley would calm him down. Larry says he suddenly had a terrifying feeling that Elvis had died. Panicked, he rushed home and called Graceland before realizing it was 3:30 a.m. in Memphis. He was about to hang up when a maid answered, half asleep. Larry says he tried to calmly ask what was happening at Graceland. She told him everything was quiet and that she had just brought Elvis some food. Larry told her he'd see her next Sunday. August 14th, 1977. Larry says he stopped at the Bodhi Tree bookstore before his flight to pick up books for Elvis. This time, he noticed a lot of books about the Holy Shroud of Turin. He knew interest in the Holy Shroud was growing, especially with scientific studies around it, but he was still surprised by how many books had been written on the subject. He picked The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus by Frank O. Adams because it stood out to him, and he got a couple of other books too. Larry's father drove him to the airport and noticed right away that Larry was quieter than usual, and he asked if anything was wrong. Larry paused because he usually told his parents everything, but they didn't know how bad things had gotten with Elvis, and because they both loved Elvis, it made it harder to say. Larry's father knew Elvis personally from visiting the movie sets in the 60s. He and Elvis would talk between takes about all kinds of things. Larry said, "Dad, I just hope he's alive by the time I get there." His dad asked, "Is it that bad, son?" Larry said, "Dad, it's worse than you know. I'm really scared." Larry says he arrived in Memphis late Sunday night and went straight to a Howard Johnson's motel near Graceland on Elvis Presley Boulevard. Larry realized he arrived on August 14th, the anniversary of Elvis's mother's death. The timing felt unsettling to him, and he couldn't shake the ominous feeling around it. Larry writes, quote, "I dismiss my feelings as negative doom and gloom. Everything's all right. I'm in Memphis. Elvis is here, and we're leaving on tour Tuesday. Perhaps this tour will be the last one before Elvis makes the new changes in his life he has spoken about many times this year." End quote. He called Graceland, and when Elvis got on the phone, Elvis sounded tired. Elvis said, "Hello, who's this?" Larry said, "It's me, E. I just checked into my room." Elvis said, "Finally, huh? Well, I guess everything is timing. I'm in bed trying to get rested and ready for the tour. Would you mind if I called it a night?" Larry said, "Of course not. I'm sure you know best, so get plenty of rest." Elvis said, "Lawrence, I'm glad you're finally here, but I need to recharge the old batteries. So I'm going to knock myself out and sleep as much as I can, all right?" Larry told him, "No problem, E. I'll talk with you tomorrow." August 15th, 1977. Larry says it was after 9 p.m. when he was having dinner at Graceland and Joe came into the kitchen. Elvis called down from his room and told Joe he wanted to watch MacArthur. Joe told Larry, "He's going over to Dr. Hoffman's to have a tooth filled, and he wants us to make the arrangements and set up the film." Larry says around 10, Elvis left with Ginger, Billy, and Charlie to see Dr. Hoffman. Meanwhile, Larry and Joe stayed behind trying to arrange a private showing of MacArthur at the Memphian Theater. They managed to set up the movie screening but couldn't find a projectionist. When Charlie called around 11:30, they told him the plan fell through, and Larry thought maybe that was for the best since they were supposed to leave for Maine the next day. Larry writes, quote, "Around 12:30, we heard the Stutz pull up the drive. I hadn't seen Elvis in 6 weeks, and when I saw him, my heart stopped. He walked through the front door and stopped in the foyer, about 15 feet from where I was standing in the dining room doorway. He removed his glasses and looked at me, very slowly shaking his head from side to side. He never said a word, but the look that he gave me spoke volumes. He put his sunglasses back on, then, with Ginger at his side, slowly ascended the staircase to his room. I didn't know this would be the last time I ever saw Elvis alive." Larry says Elvis looked worse than he had ever seen him. He was so stunned by Elvis's condition that he didn't hear Billy and Charlie say hello. Everything and everyone faded out. He sat on the sofa for nearly an hour trying to process what he was seeing. He only came back to himself when someone called his name and handed him the phone. Elvis's voice was soft. "Lawrence, did you bring that book on the Holy Shroud of Jesus?" Larry said, "Do angels have wings?" Elvis said, "Yeah, and don't forget, angels fly because they take themselves so lightly." Larry says they both laughed a little too long, probably because they were both full of nerves. Then Larry told him, Wait until you feast your eyes on the other books I brought you. You'll love them. Elvis, imitating Inspector Clouseau, said, I know that already. And that sent them laughing again. Elvis said, well, what do you think we should do, Larry? Do you want to come up here and talk, or do you think we should wait until tomorrow? Larry writes, quote, I was struck by the tone and texture of his voice. It sounded so light and pure, the way I imagined he spoke when he was a very small child. I had never heard him sound so peaceful. Larry, trying to determine what Elvis wanted, said slowly, well, E, it's really good hearing you like this. Maybe we should wait until tomorrow. It's already past 1:30 in the morning. This way you can get some rest for the tour, and I'll come up when you wake up tomorrow, do your hair, give you the books. And we have the rest of the tour. I'm sure we have a lot to talk about. How does that sound? Elvis said, well, whatever's right. Larry says Elvis seemed strangely passive. Normally, he would want to see Larry or get his new books right away, so it was unusual. Larry told him, all right, I'll see you later, E. I'm going back to my room at Howard Johnson's. I'll be there if you need me. Elvis, in Clouseau mode again, said, I knew that. Laughing, they both hung up, never bothering to say goodbye. Larry says he left Graceland with his heart pounding, but strangely he didn't feel alarmed. About an hour later, while he was reading in bed, the phone rang. Al Strada said, Elvis decided he wants the books now. He says he can't fall asleep without them. Larry said, well, I'm already in bed. I guess I could get dressed and bring them over. Al said, no, I'll come over and pick them up. I'll be there in 10 minutes. This way you can go back to bed. 10 minutes later, he was handing Al the books. Larry made sure the Shroud of Turin book was on top of the stack, and he had even marked the pages he thought Elvis would be most interested in. August 16th, 1977. Larry says he woke up the next morning after 11 feeling drained, then fell back asleep and had a frightening nightmare where a monster was chasing him. Just as the monster was about to catch him, he suddenly levitated above it, and when he looked up, he saw Elvis. Larry writes, quote, he was reaching out his hand to lift me up and kept talking to me, telling me something important, but it was drowned out by the beast's screeches and howls. When I finally escaped into consciousness, I was soaking wet with sweat and all my muscles ached. End quote. Larry tried to shake off the nightmare with a shower and then went to the coffee shop. Sitting in the coffee shop, he could see helicopters hovering over Graceland, which he thought was strange, but he wasn't concerned. He figured perhaps they needed extra footage for the CBS special and were filming, so he went back to his room to get ready and head over to Graceland. He took a shuttle bus to Graceland, and when it approached the gates, he could see crowds of people there. Larry says fans were always gathered near the gates, especially when Elvis was about to leave for a tour or had just come home. Uncle Vester saw Larry in the shuttle bus from the guardhouse, and he walked over. Larry told him, Vester, don't worry, they're just going to drive me up to the house and leave. He looked at Larry blankly for a second, then said, didn't you hear what happened? Larry said, no, what happened? Uncle Vester told him, Elvis died. Larry says it hadn't sunk in. He looked up at Elvis's bedroom window, then back at Uncle Vester. Elvis what? Uncle Vester said, he just died, Larry. Elvis died. Larry writes, quote, stepping across Graceland's threshold, I was assaulted by the mournful sounds emanating from the house. I had just walked into the den when I spotted Vernon, ashen and looking very small, sitting in a chair crying loudly. When he saw me, he extended his arm and gestured for me to come to him. End quote. Vernon wailed, he's gone, Larry, what am I gonna do? Larry held Vernon as he broke down crying. Vernon felt shockingly weak and fragile. Larry said, Vernon, I love you. Vernon cried, Larry, he's gone. Larry says Lisa Marie was crying and walking in circles saying, my daddy is dead. Vernon was completely devastated. He tried to stand but collapsed, and when they helped him up, his face was covered in tears. Larry writes, quote, during the course of the day, I walked to the back of Graceland to the wishing well where Billy and Joe Smith approached me. Billy told me that he was there when Elvis's body was discovered, and that Elvis died clutching the book I had given him, The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus, end quote. Billy asked if he could keep the book, and Larry said, of course, Billy, your family and Elvis loved you both. Okay, so this is interesting because I watched a video of Billy Smith. He was being interviewed, and someone had asked him if he was there when Elvis was discovered, and he said no. Anyway, Larry says by 5 o'clock, Graceland was full of grieving people. Everyone was devastated, but what made Elvis's death so hard to process was that no one could believe it was real. Elvis Presley dead? It didn't seem possible. Larry says as Graceland filled with more mourners and the reality hit him, he felt like he couldn't breathe. When he stepped outside, he was overwhelmed by the sight of thousands of fans gathered beyond the gates. Police were everywhere trying to manage the crowds. Thousands of grieving fans stayed outside Graceland crying and keeping vigil for Elvis even after he was laid to rest. Larry says even reporters were stunned by the massive grief outside Graceland. They knew Elvis was famous, but the scale of love and mourning was beyond what they expected. But to the people closest to Elvis, the huge crowd made perfect sense. The fans loved Elvis deeply, and they always would. Inside the house, Vernon was talking to the funeral director. He introduced Larry and said, "Larry, I'd like you to go and fix Elvis's hair for the funeral. You know what to do. You know how he should look." By early evening, Lisa Marie had started to settle down. She came into the den and sat down and said flatly, "You know, I just can't believe it. Elvis Presley is dead." Everyone looked at each other stunned. It felt strange and unreal, but at the same time, it was only one of many unsettling moments during that terrible time. Priscilla, her family, and Jerry Schilling had taken the Lisa Marie from California out to Memphis, and they arrived around 2:30 a.m. August 17, 1977. At 6 a.m., Larry picked up his wife Celeste at the Memphis airport. She had flown in with Linda Thompson, and he was relieved and comforted when they arrived, especially knowing they had made the painful trip together. Then he went to the Memphis funeral home where he met Charlie and attended to Elvis. Larry says, "The only thing that seemed real to me that day was the fact that Elvis was gone." Back at Graceland, it felt strangely quiet and empty inside. The maids and a few of the guys were there, and Dodger stayed in her room. At noon, the white hearse arrived at Graceland with a police escort, and it came through the music gates and up the driveway and stopped at the front steps. Larry writes, quote, "Several of us helped the attendants carry in the 900-pound copper coffin, which was placed in the living room and opened so that the family, friends, and staff could pay their respects. The lid was raised, and there was Elvis, dressed in a white suit, a white tie, and a pale blue shirt. His face looked so serene." End quote. Minnie Mae was brought in first, and she was held up by Vernon and Aunt Delta, but as soon as she saw Elvis, she collapsed from grief. They carried her back to her bedroom while she cried and wailed, oh God, he was the prettiest thing I ever did see." As Larry walked out of her bedroom, he remembered what Elvis had said, "She'll probably outlive me." Larry says Lisa Marie gently touched Elvis's forehead and ran her fingers through his hair, and each time she moved away, Larry quietly fixed his hair again. He says people came to Elvis's coffin one at a time, wanting a final moment with him, to see his face, touch him, and say goodbye. Vernon decided the fans should have a chance to say goodbye to Elvis too, so they moved the coffin into the foyer just inside Graceland's front door. A huge security team of 150 uniformed officers and a unit of the Air National Guard kept order as fans came through Graceland in a single line. Sitting on the staircase, Larry watched people from all over the world file past Elvis to say goodbye. Their grief was palpable. So was their love. Out on the lawn lay people who had collapsed from heat, exhaustion, hunger, thirst, or grief. One woman suffered a heart attack. Graceland was covered in flowers from all over the world and arranged in meaningful shapes like guitars, hearts, Bibles, teddy bears, crowns, and the TCB symbol. Larry says in the heavy heat, the strong, sweet scent of the flowers filled the air. The sound of insects made the scene feel even more eerie. Their constant screeching added to the heavy, unsettling atmosphere around Graceland. Larry writes, quote, "Despite our petty jealousies and disagreements, all of us who had worked for Elvis were united, as he had always wanted us to be. During the next few hours, we shared stories and fond memories of him. Interestingly, some of the group remarked about witnessing strange phenomena around the time of Elvis's death. Suddenly, they were seeking answers of their own. Elvis must have been pleased wherever he was." End quote. Larry sat next to Vernon, watching the throngs of fans come through when Vernon softly said, "Larry, now Elvis is in heaven." When police announced the gates were closing at 6 o'clock, the crowd became frantic, shouting, "No, we want to see Elvis." Once the crowd was calmed and the gates closed, they moved Elvis's coffin back to the music room. The fans' love was touching, but the situation outside had become tense. It could have turned dangerous. Later that night, a drunk driver drove through the crowd, killing 2 people and seriously injuring a third. James Brown came to Graceland to pay his respects. He sat near Elvis for a long time, and he was quiet and deeply shaken. Larry says because Elvis had admired him so much, James Brown's private tribute felt especially meaningful. Larry says the funeral service was scheduled for 2 p.m. and he arrived at Graceland at noon, and he saw at the gates people hawking souvenirs like t-shirts and buttons commemorating the event. 100 vans came that morning to move all the flowers to the cemetery where Elvis would be placed in a mausoleum near his mother's grave. Larry walked straight into the music room, and he says Elvis looked peaceful and almost radiant. At times over those 2 days, Larry even thought Elvis looked like he had a faint little smirk. Larry writes, Quote, as the hour of the funeral approached, people began arriving. Anne Margaret, who had flown in from California with her husband Roger Smith, appeared badly shaken. Ginger, who understandably hadn't yet recovered from having found Elvis's body, was devastated. She stayed near her family the whole time. Linda Thompson drew some disapproving glances when she arrived wearing a lavender dress. End quote. Linda said, I don't care what anyone thinks. Elvis told me a few years ago, black is worn at funerals for mourning. At my funeral, I want people to dress in colors and be happy for me. Elvis always told me that purple and violet are the highest spiritual colors. I know this is the way Elvis wants it. He always said, I want to know about God, about life, and life after death. And now he does. Larry says many of the women close to Elvis came holding spiritual books he had given them. Mindy Miller stood out especially because she had been close to Elvis and shared his love of spiritual study. About 45 minutes before the service, he went into the maid's bedroom where Vernon was getting dressed. Vernon said, Come in, Larry. I'm glad you're here. I want to talk to you. I just want you to know that Tuesday I was waiting for Elvis to wake up so I could go upstairs and have him send the letter from Hookstratton. I know he wanted to sign it for you. I had it in my coat jacket ready for him. Vernon pointed to something inside his jacket pocket, but before he could fully speak, his voice broke and he started to tear up. Vernon said, And Larry, you know how Elvis felt about you. You were one of his favorites, and there was only a couple. You know what I mean. You know, Larry, I've got to admit something to you. I wasn't sure about you when I met you. It took me a long time to realize you and Elvis were just a couple of spiritual guys. I didn't know it at first, and I'll tell you something else I want you to know. When you first came here years ago and you gave Elvis all those books, I couldn't figure you out. I wasn't sure. I was suspicious of you. I even told Elvis of my feelings. And you know what he said? Daddy, he's a great guy. And when he told me that, that was good enough for me. Larry said, Mr. Presley, as far as the letter from Hookstratton goes, it doesn't matter. That's not important now. And as for what you told me about Elvis and me, I'm so glad you recognize that. I always felt that you did, and it's important to me that you told me. Vernon placed his hand on Larry's knee and said, Well, I guess Elvis found what he was always searching for. Now he's at peace, and he's with God, where his heart was all along. Larry was on his way back to the music room when he saw Tom Parker arrive dressed casually in a loud Hawaiian shirt and a baseball cap. There were rumors already spreading that Parker was pressuring Vernon to keep him on as Elvis's manager. Larry writes, quote, As always, I observed Parker closely, noticing that he never once approached Elvis's coffin and never even stepped foot in the room where Elvis lay. Parker loyalists have attributed his questionable behavior to his deep and profound grief. Another Parker sympathizer explained the old man's actions thusly. He just wants to remember his boy the way he was. The way he was? When? Lying in a hotel room with his head being dunked in ice water? Stammering through lyrics with his eyes half closed? Working Vegas to cover his manager's gambling debts? Elvis's death changed nothing for Parker. He showed the same respect for Elvis in death as he had in life. I turned away in disgust. End quote. Larry says by 2 o'clock, more than 200 people had gathered inside Graceland for Elvis's service. Evangelist Rex Humbard and Jackie Kahaney both spoke during the funeral. Vernon's pastor, C.W. Bradley, gave a eulogy that felt both beautiful and honest. Bradley said, Elvis was a frail human being, and he would be the first to admit his weakness. Elvis would not want anyone to think that he had no flaws or faults. But now that he's gone, I find it more helpful to remember his good qualities. And I hope you do too. Thus, today, I hold up Jesus Christ to all of us. During Kathy Westmoreland's song, My Heavenly Father Watches Over Me, the pianist suddenly lost his place. On the way to the cemetery, Kathy told Larry, I closed my eyes when he lost his place, and I swear I could hear Elvis say, Would you believe it? That poor old guy is messing up my funeral. Kathy also sang How Great Thou Art with J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet. Jake Hess, Elvis's favorite gospel singer, then sang Known Only to Him with the Statesman Gospel Quartet, followed by J.D. and the Stamps singing His Hand in Mine and Sweet, Sweet Spirit. Everyone could hear Elvis singing too. As the funeral service ended and people began leaving, Larry and a few others stayed behind for one final goodbye to Elvis. It was Joe, Vernon, George Klein, Jerry Schilling, Billy Smith, Lamar Fike, Sam Thompson, Dick Grobe, and the rest of the guys who currently work for Elvis, and some from the past. Vernon, standing next to Larry, screamed, Son, I'll be with you soon. Son, I'll be with you soon. Joe took the TCB ring off of Elvis's finger and gave it to Vernon, who then wept and said, This is the final curtain. This is the final curtain. The funeral director, Robert Kendall, said, It's time, Mr. Presley. Then he began to very slowly close the lid. Larry writes, quote, In that moment, I knew I needed to touch Elvis one more time. I reached in and placed my hand on his forehead, closed my eyes, and said something silently to him. I quickly removed my hand as the lid was sealed forever. End quote. Larry says they followed Elvis's white hearse to the cemetery in a long line of 17 white Cadillac limousines. There were thousands of fans that lined Elvis Presley Boulevard as the procession passed. Larry rode in the limousine with Kathy Westmoreland and James Burton. The funeral motorcade moved straight through with police motorcycles guarding both sides. Even with emotional fans rushing towards the hearse, the procession never slowed down or stopped. People along the route honored Elvis as the procession passed. Law enforcement and everyday fans saluted him, and flags were lowered in Tennessee and Mississippi. The funeral procession stopped at a large white marble mausoleum surrounded by so many flowers it seemed to float on them. Elvis's coffin was taken into the mausoleum, and after a brief final service, it was placed inside the crypt, which everyone believed would be his final resting place. Larry remembered Elvis saying often, "I'm not afraid of death. Only the ignorant, the unenlightened person is afraid of death, and that's because they're afraid of living. People, man, they go to funerals and everyone wears black and everyone's crying. They should be rejoicing. The soul's free. The soul is going back to God, going home again." Larry says Elvis always thought of death as, quote, going home. For those who loved him, that belief brought some comfort after he was gone. Larry writes, quote, "Certainly, Elvis found his place with God, and he was home. Only years later, when I'd look back over the last year or so before his death, did I see how strongly death beckoned Elvis. With his lifestyle, he could have died 1,000 times, on his plane, in his sleep, on the road, but he didn't. Death came to Elvis in one of his few private moments, and he surrendered." End quote. Larry says one day in 1966 he went upstairs at Graceland to do Elvis's hair and talk with him. He knocked on Elvis's bedroom door and Elvis invited him in. He found Elvis sitting on the edge of his bed and could tell right away from his face and body language that something was bothering him. Elvis showed him a movie magazine with a dramatic headline, "Elvis still in deep grief over his mother's death." The photo attached was one of Elvis with tears in his eyes, but it was actually just a still from one of his films. Elvis was very upset. He shook his head and said, "Can you believe this? Hey, these reporters have a job to do. I respect that. But a few of them downright lie and just play on people's emotions. The almighty dollar." Elvis had Larry read the article to him, and Larry remembers it to be something like this. Quote, "Elvis's family and friends are extremely worried about Elvis. He's deeply grieving over his mother's death, and he feels desperate without her. They hear him pacing the floors in the wee hours of the morning, lamenting and weeping over her passing. One insider is worried that he's so distraught he might want to join her." End quote. Elvis said, "Grieve! Larry, I hope you never have to go through and grieve like I did. But listen, that was 1958. It was 8 years ago. Don't get me wrong, you can never really get over something like that completely. But I've come to terms with her death. Man, you can't believe what I was going through back then. I mean, everything was just crashing in on me at once. Every dream I ever had. Just when everything was going my way, Uncle Sam calls. My career comes to a screeching halt. All the movies I was starring in, my records, TV, everything. To tell you the truth, I honestly thought that maybe nobody would even remember me after I served my time. That I'd be some kind of flash in the pan. You know, people would say, 'Hey, remember that guy with the funny name? The one that used to shake his body? Arvis or something?' Then the first thing they do when I'm inducted is buzz my hair off." Elvis shook his head, exasperated. He said, "Can you imagine that, Larry? My hair, and that picture of me with that silly-ass grin on my face? Damn, man, I was dying inside. Then, when I'm struggling to deal with everything, the final blow, my mom suddenly dies on me. My mom is the light of my life, my best friend. I mean, she's the one I could always go to, man, no matter what, about the only one I really trusted. That's a blow you can never really get over, and that's when my real grieving began. Hey, I bought Graceland for my mom and dad. I bought the pink Cadillac for my mom, and jewelry, furs, and whatever I could, just to make everything up to her for all she had to go through her life. Make her happy, because she knew what pain, poverty, and struggling was all about. She lived through it. Grieve? Just put yourself in my shoes. I mean, my mom, my career, everything, overnight, just like that. Then they sent me half around the world to Germany. I'll tell you, I wasn't sure what the future had in store for me. I'd lay there at night in the dark and say, 'Why me? Why me, Lord?' I've always believed in God. That's the way I was raised. And I tell you, there were times when I really began to wonder. And I'll tell you this, Larry, I didn't have to go into the Army the way all the other guys did. They told me that if I wanted to, I could be in a special services unit. You know, represent the Army and tour the other bases around the world, talk to the guys, maybe entertain and sing. I didn't even have to think about it. I flat turned their offer down. I didn't want to be treated special or anything like that. I just wanted to let everyone know that I was just like every other guy. So I just lay there on my cot and hold everything inside. I couldn't let the guys see me grieving." Elvis then paused and he was lost in thought. Then he said, "You know me, Lawrence. I've always had an inquisitive mind. I want to know what's behind everything. I can remember when I was a little kid, I would always be asking my mom about my twin brother Jesse. You know, why he never had a chance to live. I can still hear her voice telling me just like it was yesterday, 'Honey, God took your little brother back home to heaven because it was part of his plan. He has a plan for everybody, for your daddy, for me, and for you too, Elvis. Someday I'll be going back home, and someday Daddy's gonna go home. And even someday, a long, long time from now, God's gonna bring you home too. And then we'll all be together again, all of us back home in heaven. Elvis looked at Larry very seriously and said, "And that's exactly what I believe, Lawrence. We're all going home someday." Larry titles this last part of the book, "The Song of His Soul." Larry says Elvis's deeper search was about understanding his purpose. He knew his music was a God-given gift to the world, but he felt there had to be something more he was meant to give. Music alone wasn't enough for Elvis. He believed he had been chosen for a bigger purpose, and Larry feels that after his death, Elvis's spiritual impact may have reached people in a way he never fully could while he was alive. Elvis's influence continues through his fans who raise money for charities all over the world. To Larry, Elvis remains unique. His legacy hasn't faded, but keeps growing as new fans discover and love him. Okay, so I have to agree with that because I am a newish fan, and it absolutely rings true. Larry says Elvis's legacy lives on through Graceland, where countless people still come to honor him and understand his story. He sees Elvis as someone who truly lived the American dream, rising from deep poverty to a level of fame that never faded. He says Elvis also represented the American spirit, bold, hopeful, daring, and groundbreaking. Elvis also treated everyone the same, whether they were a president, office worker, or janitor. Larry says Elvis's influence is still alive today. Even people born after his death continue to connect with his music, his image, and his personality. To Larry, Elvis is more than a legend. He's a true historic icon. Yet, one of the biggest ironies in Elvis's life was his concern if he'd be remembered. He had said, I wonder if I'll ever be remembered." Larry says Elvis's candlelight visual is unlike anything else in celebrity culture. Thousands of fans walk quietly through Graceland with candles, surrounded by flowers and wreaths, while Elvis's music plays softly in the background. The visual brings people of all ages to Elvis's grave, carrying candles and leaving flowers and cards and teddy bears. Some come grieving, some seeking healing, but all are looking for a connection to Elvis. Larry writes, quote, "An eternal flame is burning. The atmosphere is mystical, more akin to a pilgrimage to a holy shrine or a visit to a loved one's grave than an adulation of a celebrity. The people sense there is more to him than they know, an honesty and innocence that shone through the glitz and glamour. They seem to understand how much he cared about them too. Elvis, like all of us, lives on in the memories of those who love him." That's the end of the book. I really, really hope that you enjoyed this book as much as I did. I found it to be so beautiful, and it really did add another layer of depth to Elvis's life and who he was. He had such a beautiful soul. Thank you so much for watching and following along with this series and all the comments. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you at my next book review.